in and out of the Beltway. From large cities to small towns to the rural heartland. From sea to shining sea. This is Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio. Inside the News.
Welcome back to another week of Inside the News. Glad to have all of you with us all across our various platforms where we are broadcasting, whether it's our affiliates across the nation or whether it's SoundCloud, on YouTube, or AUN TV. Glad to have all of you with us. Let's say hello to Ben Brunson. How you doing today, Ben?
I'm doing just fine, Guy. It's a pleasure to be with you guys once again.
Absolutely. And Frank, what state are you in this week? You knew I was going to ask that question.
In the declining state of New York.
The state of decline. He got another D word out there, Ben.
Yet another one. More to come, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's more to come. Well, how about disconnect or dissection of America? Frank, I'm going to let you start. Go.
You know, if you watch the evening news, it is absolutely stunning how little resemblance it has to, well, news. Watching the ABC affiliate in New York recently, each story concerned with national news seemed to be more an editorial than actual news. And I think this is becoming an even larger problem. It's becoming more pronounced as, of course, the 2020 election date comes closer and closer.
Okay, Ben, your take on that.
Well, unfortunately, there's not a topic left that has not been completely politicized in this country. In the media, it is a full-on 24/7 assault against Donald Trump and his reelection. And it literally extends to every topic imaginable. I was just looking at analysis of Sweden and what they've done on the COVID side, their response. And I noticed that out of neutral sources, which would be European or Asian sources, you actually get a fair analysis of what Sweden's decision to remain open throughout the COVID crisis and their numbers versus the rest of Europe. And then you look at headlines from any U.S. left-wing source, which is virtually every U.S. source, and every headline is the same. Sweden was a disaster. They made a horrible decision. This is how you don't handle. This is the way not to react to COVID. And of course, the numbers say something totally different. The objective analysis has shown that Sweden has done quite well, much better than many European nations like the UK, France, and Spain in terms of per capita death toll. And they're emerging much stronger on the other side of this, whereas we see fall resurgences happening in Spain, UK, and France. So again, a perfect example of how the bias has become pretty untenable in this country.
You know, Frank, the next thing we have here, which ties into this, is how the media has swayed opinion, but they're not accountable. They're constantly throwing out things that are not true, and we see it every day and from the various networks. I'm not going to name the specific alphabet soup, and you know what I'm talking about. But they just kind of say things out there, and they want to sway public opinion, and they are moving at least 50% of the country, and yet they're not held to any account by anybody, Frank.
No, they're not. No, of course, none of us would favor the concept of some kind of censorship or some kind of government control. But the reality of it is that previously, when you had generations of Americans who had been properly schooled in reason, in civics and so forth, the media was held accountable not by government, but by the intelligence of the population. Now, of course, we're in a time period when we've had several generations of Americans taught by hard left professors pretty much from kindergarten through PhD level. And those resources of reasoning, those fonts of knowledge of history and of accuracy and in what America is all about are frankly going away. So this younger generation really doesn't have the tools to see through the facade of a media that is not a news media, but is nothing more than the propaganda arm of the left wing.
Frank, before I get back to Ben on this, I want to ask you somewhat of a legal question here. You know, when you go into a court of law and you testify and you take the oath, there's the threat of perjury, that if you lie or perjure yourself, then you can be held accountable and you can go to jail. And it is amazing that there's not this threat of perjury upon the media, that you can say whatever you want, you can slander, you can, libel, and there's nobody to go after you. And shouldn't there be some kind of, and then we're going to get the Ben on this, but do you know what I'm saying here, Frank?
I do. In terms of libel and slander, there's really no restrictions in the media, particularly when it comes to an elected official, unless in a very specific circumstances. Back in the 1960s, there was a case called New York Times v. Sullivan, in which a public official who believed he had been wrongly portrayed in the media attempted to sue the source. The court said, no, if you're a public official, you really don't have the right to sue for this type of libel and slander. Now, the courts have been drifting moderately away from that. So in the case of intentional libel and slander, there is some possibility of getting into court and perhaps being somewhat successful. The standard, though, is very tough on that. Clearly, though, we see in the case of President Trump, the media may have crossed a line. I could say, if I choose to, that Donald Trump is the worst human being that ever walked across the face of the earth. I could say that he does terrible things. But if I make specific criminal allegations that are not only blatantly untrue, but criminally actionable, if I say, for example, that I have evidence in my hand that Donald Trump committed rape yesterday, and of course there's no evidence whatsoever like that at all, that may cross the line. And we're seeing the left really come extremely close to that line. There's a project going on called the Transition Information Project, or TIP. And TIP is basically a totally false narrative alleging that should Donald Trump lose the election, he would not leave the White House. He would pull off some type of military coup so that he could stay in. The Democratic Party has been perpetuating this in a very significant level. This really gets close to the line of what we're talking about here. Now, it's not actionable because it's something that they say could happen, not something that they say has happened, but we're really getting close to the line. The falsehoods that are being perpetuated by the Democratic Party in the run-up of the 2020 election are frankly unprecedented in American politics.
Okay, Ben, let's take it to the next step here, because Frank laid out a perfect example there, and we had that exact example out of Adam Schiff. I've got this, that it's a treasonous act, that Donald Trump was with the Russians and blah, blah, blah. And Adam Schiff has lied wholesale. And yet, I mean, just what Frank was saying about an actionable event or a cause or something, I mean, you know exactly what I'm saying, Ben.
Well, that was exactly the name I was thinking of as he was talking, Adam Schiff, who has made false accusations one after another for 3.5 years. Michael Avenatti made false accusations in the case of Justice Kavanaugh. There's some notable exceptions, by the way, on the slander side. And Nicholas Sandmann would be the one notable exception. And of course, the exception there is that Nicholas Sandmann was a private citizen who had a private life, was unknown to the public, and was clearly slandered. And he's winning a lot of money as a result. But that is the exception, not the rule. And unfortunately, when it comes to Adam Schiff and other members of Congress, and I don't know that this is exclusive to one party, but it has certainly been overwhelmingly an issue among Democrats slandering the current president, you have essentially complete immunity when you're in Congress, when you're in the Capitol building, as to what you can and can't say. You can say anything you want, you're immune. The bigger problem to me is not that this isn't a problem, but it is the complete double standard justice system that we have on the criminal side. We now know, for instance, that the Mueller team wiped all of their cell phones repeatedly. Something like 26 plus devices were wiped clean. If a corporation or private individual did that, you would be you would be charged with obstruction of justice faster than you could say justice, and you would certainly be convicted or have to plead to something because they would have you dead to rights. When the Mueller team does it, well, it was all a mistake, which is also perjury because we know it wasn't a mistake. We know it was intentional. So they've also perjured themselves as to what they did and on top of their obstruction of justice. But again, we have all this information. We know what's happened in the whole Russian narrative, that it was all a hoax, a manufactured hoax. We know there was illegal spying that was authorized out of the White House. And so far, we have really no one held to account other than a very limited guilty plea by the Kleindienst or whatever the one guy's name was. But it remains to be seen if justice will be evenly dealt out in this country or not. The scorecard over the last 3 years is not a very pleasant one for those who believe in even-handed justice.
You know, Frank, I was thinking about when he was saying about those cell phones being wiped clean. I thought of Martha Stewart, that she doctored her emails, and that's what she went to prison for. It wasn't so much what she did. Am I correct in that, Frank?
Well, then, of course, we can go to Hillary Clinton.
Yeah,
and you know, which is probably the most significant example of all. And Ben is directly spot on. There are, in fact, two standards of justice that have been practiced in the United States over the past decade or so. The fact is that we've seen outrageous acts of libel, of slander, of destroying evidence on the part of left-wing politicians, Democrat politicians. We have seen that if those acts were committed by Republican politicians, they would be sitting in jail already.
Yeah. Okay, Ben, let's go here to the next topic here, which is that you can pick either the Nobel Peace Prize, the Nobel Prize at WHO and Donald Trump, or you can pick the bars are open, but the churches are still struggling. Which one do you want?
Well, let's talk about the Nobel Prize and
the
nomination of Donald Trump. On any objective standard, you would have to say that Donald Trump would be the leading candidate to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. He has brought about a peace treaty in the Middle East that is pretty significant. The Abraham Accords, they're signed this week between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain. It is highly likely that other Arab countries will come on board that peace treaty. I think other Arab leaders are waiting to judge the international and especially the regional reaction to these two countries leading the way. But a lot of rumors that Saudi Arabia is thinking about coming on board with those other Arab states. This is significant normalization of relation between Israel and the Arab nations. You can probably thank their common enemy, Iran, for causing this, motivating this more than anything else. But it is very significant. It also, I think, makes the likelihood of the Palestinians finally coming to the table and accepting a state within the West Bank or some type of region that they're already currently occupied as more likely. They have rejected those offers in the past. So it's a very significant move and accomplishment by Donald Trump. Jimmy Carter received the Nobel Peace Prize for his similar type of breakthrough in the Camp David Accords versus Barack Obama, who had yet to figure out where his private toilet was in the White House by the time he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't think he'd been in office for more than a handful of weeks. So that was just nonsensical. And you have Donald Trump actually achieving things and at the same time actually ending a lot of our military presence in the Middle East, ending a lot of the combat that has been going on in Afghanistan for too long now, and in Iraq, and pulling our troops back home. We're not going to disengage completely, but it's quite an accomplishment, and one in which, if let's face it, if Donald Trump had a D after his name instead of an R, he would be praised all around the world, and it would be a no-brainer. He'd win the Nobel Peace Prize by universal acclamation. But because he's a Republican, well, he probably won't receive it in the end.
60 seconds, Frank, your comment.
The fact is that the Nobel Prize people are in a quandary. If they do not give Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize, any claim they have to legitimacy is completely gone. On the other hand, you can almost see those folks over in Scandinavia basically wringing their hands and trying to figure out a way to get out of this mess. But I don't think there is a way out. If they don't give Nobel Prize to Trump, they have lost any kind of claim of legitimacy whatsoever.
Wow. And you know that they are just beside themselves with this. This is Inside the News. We are so glad that you are with us. That was Frank Vernuccio. USAGovPolicy.com is where you can find him. You can find more about Ben Brunson at benbrunson.com and Amazon.com. Find more about us at itnradio.com. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. We're going to take our first time out. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.